Full disclosure, I had COVID-19 in November of last year. I was down very sick for a couple of weeks, did not require hospitalization. Also, in August of this year, I was vaccinated using the J&J vaccine because my employer gave me no options. And I did leave a paper trail stating my objections. Okay. We're going to talk very briefly, and I do mean briefly, about the J&J vaccine. It is an adenovirus vector vaccine. And there's a study that was published on the 1st of June of this year out of Cologne, Germany by Walter Dorfler. I'm going to try and remember to put the link in the description, but it can be found on Science Direct. And the title is Adenoviral Vector DNA and SARS-CoV-2 mRNA-based COVID vaccines, possible integration into the human genome. Are adenoviral genes expressed in vector-based vaccines? What we're talking about is the current hype, fear, whatever, that the human genes can be modified by the vaccines. It's not quite as simple as yes it can, no it can't. You've probably heard a lot of debunking or fact-checking stating that there's no danger or is extreme little danger, however they want to put it. I'm just going to read you some quotes from this paper, which is publicly available about it, and you can make your own decisions. Okay, first quote. The currently administered vaccines depend on adenovirus DNA vectors or on SARS-CoV-2 mRNA that might become reverse transcribed into DNA, however infrequently. You heard that right. Might become. Actual integration of the viral DNA molecules and of adenovirus vector DNA will likely be chance events whose frequency and epigenetic consequences cannot, with certainty, be assessed. Interesting. Okay. Actual integration. They can't determine what the frequency is and what the consequences are. This synopsis describes the fate of foreign DNA in mammalian cells, its possible integration into the host genome, and the potential consequences for the transgenomic cells. Now, this guy's laboratory has studied this exact phenomenon for years. He is, I don't know how he ranks in the world, but he's certainly an expert, and the paper appears to be pretty well written, although I did find one typo, which is amazing. Okay, there is no evidence for human adenovirus to be causally involved in human tumorigenesis, but this possibility cannot be categorically excluded either, in particular for the vector-based vaccines. That's the J&J vaccine. He says there's no evidence that the adenovirus could be hooked to tumor growth. No evidence, but it can't be excluded. Work on and with adenovirus vectors is premised on the unproven claim that these vectors are safe because adenovirus DNA would, quote, not integrate, end quote, into the recipient cell's genomes. There is no solid evidence for this interpretation. Yes, you heard that right. This guy, in this scientific paper, which has been peer-reviewed apparently, says that there's no solid evidence saying that it can't integrate. Now, he gets into the heart of it. This is more on why he's doing this. Okay, public interest in the fate of foreign adenoviral or SARS-CoV-2 reverse transcribed DNA in mammalian human cells and organisms has become acute and widespread. The public is interested in this. We're vaccinating hundreds of millions of people and the public is interested. Not a shock. The author, Mr. Dorfler, submits to the concept that the public is entitled to the full scope of scientific information in these issues. He says the public has a right to know. Now, I want you to listen very carefully to the next quote. This is from the abstract, because that last was a quote from the abstract. This next quote from the abstract, I'm going to read slowly and carefully, and I want you to listen to or read between the lines. This is very important. In the face of the still expanding worldwide SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, this information, the information he says we should have, has to be counterbalanced vis-a-vis the benefits of an adenovirus DNA vector-based or an mRNA vaccine against life-threatening COVID-19. I'm going to paraphrase. The information he says we have to have a right to has to be counterbalanced. Not the opinions. The information itself has to be counterbalanced. By what? What do we counterbalance information with? There's only one thing that's opposite information. That's misinformation. Lies. Because, he's saying that because COVID is such a life-threatening, worldwide life-threatening condition, and I'm not denying it is, I probably have watched more people die of COVID-19 than anybody in this audience. Okay? It's real. But he says this information about what could happen has to be counterbalanced. Well, maybe, just maybe, the people who read this paper took that to heart and feel that the only way to counterbalance the information is by just not telling you what could happen. Now, moving along, the possible long-term sequelae, I never could pronounce that word, of adenoviral vector DNA or reverse transcribed SARS-CoV-2 messenger RNA integration for the functionality and survival of vector transgenic cells cannot be predicted with certainty in individual cases. The possible long-term results of potential integration into the cellular DNA cannot be predicted in individual cases. Nevertheless, at this stage in the COVID-19 pandemic, our activities will have to be focused on fighting the pandemic with adequate vaccines and future therapeutic measures. He's saying that there's a possibility that nobody can tell you that it can't happen, that he doesn't believe it's likely, but we really, really, really don't know the potential consequences. And what we need to focus now on is vaccinating people and therapeutic measures. That's it. Now, based on what I just said, you have to make up your own mind. Personally, I am now leaning against the J&J vaccine because of this. I think now that if you're going to take a vaccine, possibly the mRNA is safer because of the way it does what it does. But any way you slice it, this puts it much more strongly in the camp of natural immunity. If you've had it, your body's going to respond normally to it, and you're going to have natural immunity. That's all I really have to say at the moment, folks. I'll be back with more as soon as I can.